She didn't scream when they dragged her out of the dark. She had forgotten how. 3 years in that dungeon. 3 years of cold stone and silence. They called her nobody. They were wrong. He came with blood on his hands and fire in his eyes. The Rogue King. The most feared alpha alive. He wasn't supposed to find her. Nobody was. But then the torch caught her skin, and the silver crescent on her shoulder began to glow. He went completely still. His whole army went still. Because every wolf alive had heard the prophecy. The girl with the ancient moon mark doesn't just survive the darkness. She commands it. She looked up at him through tangled hair and hollow cheeks. Broken. Barefoot. Barely breathing. And he looked back at her like she was the only thing in the world worth burning kingdoms for. This is not a rescue story. This is a claiming story. And before it's over, she won't just wear his mark. She'll wear his crown. If you love forbidden power, slow burn desire, and a love that starts chains and ends in flames, you need to watch every second of this. Like this video. Drop a comment. Share it with someone who deserves a queen. And subscribe, because this story is just getting started. Chapter 1. The Ritual of the Silver Crescent. The dungeon had no windows. That was the first thing they took from her. Light. Then warmth. Then her name. Down here, in the belly of the Blackstone Fortress, she was simply the girl in Cell 7. Nobody asked what she looked like before. Nobody remembered what she sounded like when she laughed. 3 years of cold stone and dripping walls had stripped all of that away, layer by layer, the way rust strips iron slow, and then all at once. Her name was Celine. She had almost forgotten that too. She sat in the corner of her cell with her knees pulled to her chest, her dark hair matted against pale skin, her dress nothing more than a torn gray rag. The chains around her wrists were old. Heavy. They had been made for someone much larger. She wore them anyway. Not because she couldn't slip them, she'd stopped trying years ago. She wore them because somewhere, in the deepest part of her, she had started to believe she deserved them. That was the real prison. Not the iron. Not the stone. The belief. Outside her cell, she could hear boots. Heavy, urgent, wrong. Not the lazy shuffle of the night guard. These were soldiers' boots. War boots. And there were too many of them. Celine lifted her head. Something was coming. The torchlight in the corridor shifted from orange to sharp white. Voices cut through the dark, low commands, the clash of steel, a scream from somewhere above that was cut off too quickly. Her pulse kicked hard against her ribs. She pressed herself further into the corner, pulling the tattered hem of her dress down over her shoulder. Over the mark. Always cover the mark. Her mother had told her that when she was 6 years old. Her mother's hands had been trembling when she said it. Her eyes had been wild with something between love and absolute terror. Cover it. Always. No matter what. If they see it, they will never stop hunting you. She had covered it for 22 years. Tonight, the chains had a different weight. The door at the end of the corridor exploded inward. Not opened. Not unlocked. Exploded. Celine flinched as stone dust rained down from the ceiling. Boots thundered past cells. She could hear the other prisoners scrambling, crying, pressing themselves against bars. Then silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that arrives just before something changes everything. A single torch moved slowly down the corridor. The footsteps behind it were calm. Unhurried. Absolute. As if whatever walked toward her owned not just this dungeon, but the earth underneath it. He stopped in front of Cell 7. She couldn't see his face clearly through the bars. Just height. Just width. Just the kind of presence that seemed to displace air. He spoke one word. Open it. The lock didn't resist. The door swung wide. He stepped in, and the torchlight fell across him fully, and Celine forgot to breathe. He was enormous. Dark hair, jaw sharp enough to cut stone, eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm rolls in, pale silver gray, and completely still. He wore black leather and old blood. His arms were built like they had been forged, not grown. There was a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, healed silver white, older than recent war. He was looking at her like she was a problem he hadn't expected to find. She looked back at him like she was already calculating her odds of surviving this. They were not good. "Which pack?" he said quietly. She said nothing. One of his soldiers moved toward her. He raised one hand without looking, and the soldier stopped cold. "I'm asking you," he said. His voice. Lord above, his voice. Low and quiet and absolutely certain of itself. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had never been ignored. "I don't belong to any pack," Celine said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. 3 years of near silence had done that. But she held his gaze. She didn't know why. Everything in her said to look down. To disappear. To become small and invisible the way she had learned to be. She couldn't. Something about the way he was looking at her made small impossible. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then his gaze dropped. To her shoulder. To the place where the torn neckline of her dress had slipped. To the mark. She yanked the fabric up. Too late. He had already seen the faint silver shimmer beneath the grime. The perfect crescent. The size of a thumbprint. Sitting exactly where the old text said it would sit, right at the curve of the left shoulder, a brand from something older than any living wolf. The torch in his hand flickered. His entire body went still. Not the stillness of a man who was confused. The stillness of a man who had just found something he had spent his entire life believing didn't exist. "Show me," he said quietly. No. He didn't argue. He simply waited. And somehow that was worse than arguing. Celine's hands were shaking. She pressed the fabric harder against her skin. "Whatever you think you saw. I know what I saw." 3 words. No room in them for doubt. He crouched down to her level, which nobody had ever done before. The soldiers behind him shifted uncomfortably. He didn't notice or didn't care. He was eye level with her now, close enough that she could see the particular silver of his irises wasn't just color. It moved. Like liquid. Like moonlight caught in water. "How long have you been down here?" he asked. She blinked. Of all the questions she expected, it wasn't that one. 3 years, she said before she could stop herself. Something moved behind his eyes. Quick and private and gone before she could name it. He stood up. "Unchain her." The soldier closest to her moved forward, and she pressed herself back into the wall, and he said it again, louder this time, with an edge underneath. Gently. The soldier slowed down. Knelt. Removed the chains like they were made of glass. Celine stared at the man who had given that order. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking up at the ceiling of the dungeon, as if he was recalculating something enormous inside his own head. When he looked back down, his expression was controlled and unreadable. "Can you walk?" he said. "I've been walking for 22 years, she said flatly. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. "Then walk," he said. "We're leaving." Outside the fortress, under a sky torn open with stars, Celine looked up for the first time in 3 years and felt the cold air hit her face like a hand pressing against a wound. The moon was full, and the mark on her shoulder ignited. It didn't hurt. That was the thing. She had always expected it to hurt if it ever activated. Instead, it burned like light, like sunrise from the inside out. Silver heat radiating outward from the crescent, pressing through the fabric of her dress in a soft, cold glow. Every wolf in the raiding party froze. Every single one of them. And then, slowly, they dropped to one knee. All of them. Hardened rogue warriors with blood still on their blades, kneeling in the mud as if their legs had made the decision independently of their brains. All except him. He stood perfectly still, facing her, his expression doing something complicated and dangerous and entirely unguarded for exactly 3 seconds. Then he got control of it. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. She took it. The ancient prophecy of the Silver Crescent was not written on paper. It was carved into the stone pillars of the oldest lunar temple in existence, a ruin that only rogue packs had ever been brave enough or desperate enough to visit. The words were simple. They always are when the truth is absolute. She who carries the crescent of the first moon shall command the tides of war and the tides of blood. She is the key. She is the lock. She is the door itself. Whoever stands beside her at the moment of her awakening shall rule at the end of all things, or be destroyed by the beginning of them. The Rogue King had read those words when he was 17 years old. He had spent the next 10 years deciding he didn't believe them. Now he was 32, and the girl whose shoulder glowed like a fallen piece of sky was sitting in the back of his war wagon, wrapped in a cloak one of his soldiers had offered without being asked, staring at her own hands with an expression he couldn't categorize. He sat across from her. She didn't look up. "You knew what you were," he said. It wasn't a question. "I knew what I was hiding," she said quietly. He watched her. "Who put you in that dungeon?" A pause. Long enough to contain something sharp. "My own pack." He said nothing. "Let that sit." "They were afraid of it," she continued, almost to herself. "The Alpha said if the High Council ever found out the bloodline had surfaced in his territory, he'd be executed for hiding it. So he hid me instead. 3 years. In chains. Because someone was afraid of a girl who glowed in the dark." He felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that had a temperature. He looked away before she could see it on his face. If you're already feeling this story in your chest, you're in the right place. Drop a comment below. Tell me, Team Rogue King from the start, or do you need more convincing? And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now because where we're going from here, you do not want to miss a single second. Chapter 2. The Rogue King's Ultimatum. The rogue camp was not what she expected. Celine had imagined chaos, violence, a lawless sprawl of desperate wolves living like animals in the dark. What she found instead was a city that had built itself out of defiance. Stone walls that had been constructed, not inherited. Training grounds that were active before dawn. Children running between the structures without fear. An order that had been earned rather than imposed. He had built this. She could feel it. The way a place reflects the person who shaped it. This camp had his energy in it, controlled, purposeful, and carrying an undercurrent of something coiled tight that never fully released. He brought her to a large stone building near the center of camp. Inside, around a fire that was big enough to heat the entire room, his inner circle waited. There were 5 of them. 3 men and 2 women, all of them looking at Celine with varying degrees of suspicion, calculation, and outright hostility. The one who spoke first was a woman. Tall, bronze-skinned, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes like black mirrors. She was beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, with a specific warning built into the aesthetics. Her name, Celine would later learn, was Mara, his second in command. And the look she turned on the Rogue King was the look of someone who had personally helped him build everything in this room and was watching him threaten it with both hands. "Kale," Mara said quietly. Not a greeting. A warning dressed as a name. Kale. That was his name. It landed in Celine's chest in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I see her mark," Mara continued. "I see it glowing through the cloak. I know what you're thinking. I need you to not think it." "It's already done," Kale said. The room went very quiet. "The prophecy," said one of the men near the fire. Young, with sandy hair and a jaw set tight. "Kale, the prophecy says whoever stands beside her at awakening." "I know what it says, Davin." "Then you know what you just walked into." "I know exactly what I walked into." He said it looking directly at Celine. She held his gaze because she had nothing left to lose, and she had decided, somewhere between the dungeon and the war wagon, that she was done making herself small. "She's not staying here," Mara said flatly. "Every alpha on the eastern seaboard is going to be searching for that mark by morning. We keep her here. We paint a target on every man, woman, and child in this camp." "She's staying," Kale said. "Kale." "She is staying." Quiet. Absolute. The room didn't argue again. Mara looked at Celine with something complicated in her dark eyes. Not pure hatred. Something more like grief mixed with resignation, and something else entirely, something that almost looked like recognition. Then heaven help all of us, Mara said softly. They gave Celine a room that actually had a door. A bed with blankets. A basin of hot water. Simple things that she stood and stared at for a long time because she had forgotten what it felt like to be given things. A woman named Petra came to help her clean up. Older, soft-spoken, with hands that moved gently and eyes that didn't ask questions. She helped Celine wash 3 years of dungeon from her hair and skin. She found her clean clothes that fit. She didn't stare at the mark even though it was still faintly luminous in the low candlelight. When Petra was gone, Celine stood in front of the small polished steel mirror and looked at herself. The girl looking back was startling. She had forgotten her own face. Wide dark eyes. High cheekbones. A mouth that sat at rest in something that looked like it used to know how to smile. She was too thin. Her wrists were marked from the chains. There were hollows under her eyes that would take time to fill. But the mark. The silver crescent on her left shoulder was luminous and clean, and looking at it directly felt like looking at something ancient and awake and entirely certain of what it was. She pressed her fingers against it. It pulsed once. Like a heartbeat. She jerked her hand back. There was a knock at the door. She already knew, before she answered it, who was on the other side. Kale filled the doorway the way he filled every space, not by trying to, but by simply existing in it fully. He had cleaned up as well. The old blood was gone. He was wearing simpler clothes, and he was somehow more unsettling for it, because without the armor and the torchlight drama, he was just a man standing in a doorway, and the man was devastating. She hated that she noticed. "May I come in?" he asked. It was so unexpectedly courteous that she blinked. "It's your camp," she said. "It's your room," he said. She stepped back. He came in and stood by the small window, looking out at the camp with his arms crossed over his chest, and there was something almost domestic about it that felt entirely at odds with everything he was. "I need to know everything," he said. "Your bloodline. Your pack. How long the mark has been active." "It started glowing the moment you walked into the dungeon," she said honestly. He turned and looked at her. "It activated in response to you," she said quietly. "I don't know what that means." He did know. She could see it. He knew exactly what it meant, and he was deciding how much to tell her. "The prophecy says the mark activates in the presence of its counterpart," he said carefully. "The one the first moon chose to rule beside the crescent bearer." The silence that followed had a specific weight. "That's what Mara is afraid of," Celine said slowly. "Mara is afraid of a lot of things," he said. "Most of them are correct." "Are you afraid?" He looked at her for a long moment. The silver of his eyes moved in that liquid way that had no business being on a human face. "No," he said finally. "You should be," she said. "If the High Council finds out the bloodline has surfaced and that you're harboring it." "I'm not harboring it," he said quietly. He crossed the room in 3 measured steps and stopped 2 feet from her, and the air between them was suddenly full of something warm and electric and entirely too aware of itself. "The prophecy doesn't say the rogue king harbors the crescent bearer." He held her gaze. "It says he claims her." She didn't step back. She should have stepped back. "I didn't agree to be claimed," she said softly. "Not yet," he said. And then he stepped back himself, because he was clearly a man who understood the value of leaving a sentence in a room without finishing it. He was halfway to the door before she found her voice. "Why did you free me?" she asked. "Before you saw the mark. Before you knew. You told them to unchain me gently." "Why?" He stopped. His back was to her. "Because nothing that's been through what you'd clearly been through deserved any more rough handling," he said quietly. Then he left. And Celine stood in the middle of the room with one hand pressed against her chest, as if something had just landed there and taken up permanent residence. The next 2 days changed her body before they changed her spirit. Petra fed her real food, rich stews, warm bread, honey and butter in quantities that made Celine's eyes water with something embarrassingly close to gratitude. She slept 12 hours the first night, 14 the second. She hadn't known a body could be that hungry for rest. On the third morning, she woke before dawn and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like herself. Not the frightened girl in the dungeon. Not the forgotten captive. Something older and steadier, sitting just under the surface, pressing up the way spring presses up through frozen ground. She found the training grounds. She stood at the edge and watched the rogue warriors move through their drills in the gray pre-dawn light. Powerful. Disciplined. Every single one of them carrying the particular kind of pride that belongs to people who chose their allegiance rather than inheriting it. She felt him before she saw him. The mark on her shoulder warmed. "You're up early," Kale said, coming to stand beside her. "I spent 3 years sleeping in a dungeon," she said. "I've had enough of the dark." He was quiet for a moment. They both watched a pair of young warriors spar in the training yard. "How long has your pack kept you a secret?" he asked. "Since I was 6, she said. "Since you were 6, he repeated. Something in his voice had an edge underneath it. Controlled anger. Not aimed at her. Aimed at the facts of what had been done to her and done to something that should have been protected. The High Council would have done the same thing, he said. Only less quietly. They'd have turned the bloodline into a weapon. Into their weapon. Kept you caged in a different kind of dungeon. As opposed to being claimed by a rogue king, she said with a precision that was not quite sarcasm, but lived right next to it. He turned and looked at her sideways. And she saw it again, that ghost of a smile. Just one corner of his mouth. Just for a moment. "I'm the better option," he said. "I haven't decided that yet," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I haven't asked again." Chapter 3. War of the Shattered Packs. The ravens arrived on the 4th morning. Not literal ravens, though the rogue camp kept trained messengers of a very old variety. These messages came through the bone whistle network, ancient signals carved in frequencies only wolfkin could hear. Celine heard them too, which startled everyone, including herself. 3 calls. 3 packs on the move. Davin burst into the strategy room where Kale and Mara were already bent over the carved territory map, and his expression said everything before his mouth did. "Ironcliff, Duskwater, and the Northern Spire," he said. "All 3 mobilizing. Full war parties." Mara slammed one hand on the map. "I told you." Kale didn't react. He was already reading the shape of it. Celine could see the tactical calculation running behind his eyes like water finding the fastest path downhill. "They can't know she's here," Davin said. "Not yet. We've been dark for 4 days." "They don't need to know she's here," Kale said. "They know the mark activated. Every senior wolf in a 300-mile radius would have felt that pulse the night we left the fortress. They're not coming for information. They're coming to take what activated it. And if we hand her over," Davin began. The look Kale turned on him was the quietest, most absolute no Celine had ever seen expressed without words. Davin closed his mouth. Celine, standing in the doorway where nobody had noticed her yet, stepped into the room. Mara saw her first. Her eyes went to the mark, barely visible at Celine's color. Then up to her face. Mara's expression was like a door that had been closed for a very long time, and this was the moment someone knocked, and she wasn't sure whether to open it. "I want to see the map," Celine said. "You're not a general," Mara said. "Not yet," Celine said quietly, and something in the room shifted, because she had said it in exactly the same even, unhurried tone that Kale used when he meant something all the way down to the bone. Kale moved back from the map and made a deliberate space beside him. She stepped up beside him. Their shoulders almost touched. The mark pulsed. She felt him feel it, saw the minute tension that moved through his jaw, and he didn't move away. Neither did she. She studied the map. Ironcliff was coming from the east, following the river valley, straightforward, predictable. The Northern Spire was moving along the ridge lines, which was slower but gave them elevation. Duskwater was the wild card. Their territory shared a border with 3 others, and they had never been easy to predict. Duskwater won't commit fully, she said. Everyone looked at her. They're flanking the Spire's advance. They want to arrive second, not first, so if the Spire gets destroyed, they can absorb the fallout and claim they were always coming to negotiate. She looked up at Kale. They're not attacking. They're positioning. Kale studied her face for a moment. She's right, Mara said quietly. The admission seemed to cost her something, but she made it. Duskwater has always played for Aftermath. It's how they've survived this long. Kale was still looking at Celine. How do you know this? He asked. My alpha sold information to Duskwater for 12 years to keep my existence hidden, she said flatly. I listened through the walls of my captivity. I had nothing else to do. 3 years of listening. Of learning the politics of the wolf world from the inside of a cell. Of storing it all in a mind that had no other occupation. She had not been idle in the dark. She had been studying. Something shifted behind Kale's eyes, something that looked, from a certain angle, uncomfortably like awe. Then you know how they fight, he said. I know how they think, she said. Which is more useful. The first skirmish came at dusk on the 5th day. Ironcliff's advance scouts hit the eastern perimeter hard and fast, expecting to break through and assess before the main party arrived. What they found was Kale's rogue warriors waiting in a formation that made no logical sense until it snapped shut around them like a trap, because the formation had been designed based on Celine's map adjustments that morning, built around the particular vulnerability of Ironcliff's scouting patterns. It was over in 11 minutes. No deaths on either side. The scouts were captured, stripped of weapons, and released with a single message delivered verbally by a young rogue warrior who spoke with the particular calm of someone who has nothing to prove. The Crescent is claimed. Come for her and you come for all of us. There is another way forward. Choose it. The scouts ran. The message went with them. Celine watched from the eastern wall, wrapped in a heavy cloak, the mark glowing very softly at her shoulder. She felt the victory in her bones not as triumph, but as relief that nobody had died for her today. That the weapon she apparently was had not yet required blood to demonstrate its existence. Kale came to stand beside her. They stood like that for a long moment in the falling dark, watching the scouts disappear into the tree line. You saved lives today, he said quietly. I moved lines on a map, she said. Same thing here. He paused. You have a strategic mind. A real one. I had nothing else to exercise for 3 years, she said, but there was something underneath the words that was softer than she intended. Don't do that, he said. She looked at him. Don't minimize it, he said. Don't shrink from it. You used the worst years of your life to become dangerous. That's not a small thing. That's everything. She didn't have an answer for that. She turned back to the tree line. Her throat was doing something it hadn't done in years, that particular tight ache that means feeling something you don't have words for yet. My inner circle thinks I'm losing my judgment, he said. Are you? He was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the trees below the wall. I don't know yet, he said. I know what I feel when I stand next to you. I know what the mark does. I know what the prophecy says. He turned to look at her. I don't know what you want. She held his gaze. I want to never go back in a cage, she said softly. That I can guarantee absolutely, he said. And I want to choose, she said. Everything else. I want to choose it. He held her gaze for a long, measured moment. Then choose, he said. Simple. Total. The second battle came 3 days later. The northern spire came down from the ridge lines with numbers 60 warriors, full armor, the kind of coordinated force that didn't bother with scouts because it didn't need to be subtle. Their alpha, a broad-shouldered elder wolf named Crescent, had ruled his territory for 30 years and had never once been on the losing side of anything. He was about to have a new experience. The battle lasted 40 minutes and was decided in the last 5, when Celine, standing at the rear of Kale's command position, felt something she had never felt before. The mark didn't warm. It opened. There was no other word for it. Like a door in her chest swinging wide, and through it poured something enormous and silver and ancient. Not rage, Not power in the crude sense, but authority. The kind that does not ask permission. She didn't make a decision. She simply raised her left hand. The moonlight, which had been hiding behind cloud all night, fell through a gap in the sky directly onto the battlefield. Silver light hit the spire's flank formation, and every wolf in it faltered. Not from pain. From recognition. From the bone-deep, instinctive terror of a wolf that has just looked at the sky and understood that the sky is looking back. The formation broke. Crescent, to his credit, didn't run. He stood in the silver light and looked across the field and found Celine standing in the glow of her own mark, and his old face did something complicated. He lowered his sword. And then, slowly, he bowed. Not in defeat. In something much older. The bow of a man who has just seen something he was raised to believe was a story, and had to rearrange every certainty he possessed. Cale watched it from beside her, and when he looked at her, his expression was completely open for exactly one moment, raw and specific and full of a feeling he hadn't chosen and couldn't undo. If this story is in your bloodstream right now, I need you to stop and like this video. Right now. It takes 1 second and it tells me to keep going. Drop a comment. I want to know if you felt that battlefield scene. And share this with someone who needs a story that hits hard. Don't go anywhere. The best part is still coming. Chapter 4. Awakening the Empress. The night after the battle with the Northern Spire, Celine couldn't sleep. She sat on the roof of her building and looked at the moon and tried to understand what she had done. Not the mechanics of it, the feeling. The sense of something enormous moving through her that was hers and had always been hers, sleeping in her blood through 22 years of covering and hiding and apologizing for existing. She heard him come up behind her. She always heard him coming now. Not because he made noise, he didn't. But because the mark always knew before she did. He sat down beside her. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that she was entirely aware of every inch that separated them, which was its own specific kind of proximity. When I was 17, he said quietly, I was exiled. She looked at him. My Pax Alpha decided I was a threat. Too strong, too young, too unwilling to pretend the hierarchy made sense. He had me stripped of rank and cast out with nothing but the clothes on my back. He looked at the moon. I spent 2 years completely alone. I built this camp from nothing. I found wolves that the system had thrown away, and I gave them a home. He paused. Everyone I've ever protected, I protected because someone powerful decided they were inconvenient. She understood what he was telling her. He was telling her he had always been looking for her. Not her specifically. The idea of her, the person that power had decided was too dangerous to be free. I'm not a project, she said quietly. No, he agreed immediately. You're not. And I'm not a weapon. No. And I'm not going to be used, even by someone who freed me from people who used me differently. He turned and looked at her fully. I know, he said. Then what am I to you? She asked. The question sat between them like a lit match held still. Everything the prophecy said, he said quietly. And more than I expected. And something I have no clean words for yet. He held her gaze. Is that honest enough? She looked at him for a long time. The mark glowed. Almost, she said softly. He reached up slowly, with a deliberateness that gave her every opportunity to pull back, and brushed a piece of hair from her face. His fingers barely grazed her temple. It was the most careful touch she had ever received from another person. It undid 3 years of dungeon and 22 years of hiding in under a second. She didn't pull back. Neither did he. They sat like that, her skin still warm from his fingertip, the moon above them enormous and silver, and neither of them moved or spoke for a long time because some moments are too full for motion. The ritual came 2 days later. Petra had known it was coming. She'd been preparing quietly, gathering items from the camp's deep storage that Celine had no names for, burning particular woods in the fire pit behind Celine's room, singing low and old and wordless in the pre-dawn. When Celine asked what it was, Petra looked up with eyes that were wet and said simply, The women of the old blood always knew how to do this. We just had to wait for the right girl. The ritual was held at moonrise, not in a temple. The rogue camp had no temples. They held it in the open courtyard under the sky, with the full face of the moon watching. Kale's entire inner circle was present. Most of the camp gathered at the perimeter, not commanded to be there, but drawn, the way people are drawn to fires and storms. Celine stood in the center of the courtyard in a simple white dress that Petra had made with her own hands. Her dark hair was down. The mark on her shoulder was uncovered for the first time in her life, and the night air on it felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. She was terrified. She let herself feel it. Not as weakness, as honesty. She was terrified because she was about to become something she had never been allowed to be, and the height of that fall, if it went wrong, would be absolute. Kale stood across the courtyard from her. He was watching her with that particular steadiness of his, the kind that didn't flinch and didn't perform and wasn't trying to be anything other than present. She found his eyes in the crowd and kept them. Petra began to speak. Old words. Words that predated every living pack and every living alpha. Words from when the moon was young and the first wolves ran under it, and the Crescent bloodline was simply called the gift that remembers. The mark on Celine's shoulder caught the moonlight. And then it was not just catching it. It was calling it. Silver light that bent impossibly, down from the sky and concentrated at her shoulder, running along her skin in channels like water finding old riverbeds. She felt it enter her not with pain, not with the violent shattering she expected. It entered like memory, like returning to something she had always been. Her eyes went silver. Everyone in the courtyard felt it. A pressure warm and absolute, like weather that comes from inside the bones rather than the sky. Celine breathed in. And the girl who had lived in fear breathed out for the last time. What breathed back in was something she had no name for yet. Not a weapon. Not a prisoner. Not a project or a prize or a prophecy made flesh. A person who had always been extraordinary and was finally, in a place where that was not a sentence. Kale crossed the courtyard. Not quickly. Deliberately. Every step visible, every step chosen. He stopped in front of her, and in the silver light his eyes were doing that liquid thing and his jaw was set, and his expression was the most completely honest she had seen it, which is to say, it looked like a man standing in front of something that had already permanently rearranged his interior world and was making the explicit choice to step toward it rather than away. He held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she took it. And she felt, through the touch, the mark responding to him, pulsing outward, recognizing, completing something the prophecy had written 10,000 years ago that neither of them had asked for and both of them had arrived at anyway. You're not going to bow, she said. Not now, he said. Now you're just Celine. He paused. Later, if you want, I'll bow. She laughed. She hadn't heard herself laugh in 3 years, and it came out rough and real and alive, and the sound of it moved through the courtyard and the people at the perimeter began to cheer, not the performed cheering of subjects performing loyalty, but the spontaneous, uncontrollable joy of people watching something broken become whole. Mara stepped forward. Her expression had changed. The grief and the resistance and the calculated fear were still there, but underneath them, pressing up, was something that might have been love, the rough, reluctant love of a woman who had been right about all the risks and was choosing to step toward the fire anyway. I still think this is going to get us all killed, Mara said, looking at Celine directly. I know, Celine said. But if we're going down, Mara continued, I'd rather go down behind someone with real power than behind someone performing it. She looked at Kale. She's remarkable. You were right. I know, Kale said. Mara made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a curse, and turned away to begin preparation for what everyone in the camp already understood was coming. War. Real war. Not skirmishes. The kind that ends things. Chapter 5, A New Lunar Order. The High Council's declaration arrived at dawn on the 8th day. Not a messenger. A proclamation, sent through every channel simultaneously, the Bone Whistle Network, the Raven Lines. The official sealed letters delivered to all pack territories by council runners who wore white and were never harmed by anyone because everyone agreed that killing messengers was a line you didn't cross. Celine read it standing at the window of the war room, her silver-lit eyes moving quickly across the formal script. The council declared the girl carrying the silver Crescent bloodline to be property of the High Throne. Any pack harboring her was in violation of the Lunar Accords. The rogue King Kale was to be stripped of all claimed territory and executed on sight. She set the parchment down. "Well," she said. "Well," Kale agreed from behind her. "They're afraid," she said. "The High Council has been afraid for a century," he said. "Every decision they've made has been about protecting power they never actually earned. They inherited it. They fortified it. They've spent 3 generations eliminating anyone who might remind the wolf world that bloodlines can be overwritten by something older and more legitimate." "Like the mark," she said. "Like you," he said. She turned around. He was leaning against the stone wall with his arms crossed, watching her with that particular unhurried attention he had that made her feel simultaneously seen and warm and unreasonably, inconveniently alive. "If we fight the council directly," she said carefully, "we lose. They have the numbers. They have the established hierarchy. They have 30 years of conditioned loyalty from every highborn pack." "Agreed," he said. "But if the bloodline declares itself," she said slowly, "and the rogues stand behind it, and every cast-out wolf in every forgotten corner of the territory understands that the old order just used them as furniture. They come to us," Mara said from the doorway, and her voice had something in it that it hadn't had a week ago. Hope that had made friends with strategy. Not all of them, but enough. The next 4 days were the most intense of Celine's life. They sent word through the rogue network, not messages of war, but messages of truth. The bloodline had surfaced. The mark was real. The prophecy that every wolf alive had been told was mythology was standing in a rogue camp and breathing and making battle plans. "Come if you choose. Stay if you're afraid. But know that the tide is turning." They came. Not in the hundreds. Not at first. In ones and twos and small groups, wolves who had been exiled, demoted, dismissed. Wolves who had served the council faithfully and been used and discarded. Wolves who were simply tired of a world where power meant cruelty and hierarchy meant silence. By the morning of the 12th day, the rogue camp had doubled. By the 15th, it had tripled. Mara, organizing the new arrivals with a focused ferocity that was beautiful to watch, came to Celine every morning with the numbers and the assessment and the resource requirements. And Celine went through them methodically and made decisions and didn't second-guess them afterward, and somewhere in those mornings, without ceremony, Mara stopped seeing her as a liability and started seeing her as a colleague. It didn't happen in a grand moment. It happened in a Tuesday morning logistics meeting when Celine caught a supply chain error that would have left the eastern flank without water for 3 days, and Mara looked up from the map and said flatly, "That would have been a disaster," and Celine said, "I know." And they kept working. That was the whole thing. That was all it took. The High Council moved on the 19th day. A combined force of 5 pack armies, unified under the council banner for the first time in 30 years, over 200 warriors, the finest armor, wolves who had trained for exactly this kind of engagement. They moved at night, efficiently, in coordinated columns. They expected to find a rogue camp. They found an army. The first contact came at the narrow pass 3 miles from camp, the pass that Celine had marked on the map 2 weeks earlier and said, "This is where we stop them," because the geography was a funnel and a funnel only works for the person standing at the wide end. Kale led the front line himself. Celine had argued about that. He had said, quietly and with infuriating calm, "I've been leading from the front my entire life. I'm not changing that for any reason." She had said, equally quietly, "You're not expendable." He had looked at her with those silver eyes and said, "Neither are you. And I notice you're not offering to stay back." She had not stayed back. She stood at the ridge line above the pass with the mark lit, visible from a mile away in the dark, a beacon, deliberate and defiant and entirely intentional. The silver crescent on her shoulder blazing like a second moon, because she had decided that the days of hiding were done, and if the High Council wanted to look at what they were coming to take, she was going to let them look at it clearly. The council force paused at the mouth of the pass. Celine could feel the fear moving through them from half a mile away. Not from the numbers. From her. From the mark they had told everyone was a fairy tale, burning silver bright in the real dark of a real night. The council's lead alpha, a gray-haired, heavily armored wolf named Aldrich, who had held the senior position for 20 years, rode forward from the line. He looked up at the ridge. He looked at the mark. And Celine looked back at him. "You are in violation of the lunar accords," he called up. Formal. Loud. His voice carrying the particular tone of a man who is performing authority because the real thing has just become uncertain. "The lunar accords were written by your grandfather," Celine called back. "To govern a world where the silver bloodline didn't exist anymore. It does exist. I'm standing here. The old accords don't cover this. The bloodline belongs to the throne. The bloodline is the throne," she said clearly. "And the throne is announcing itself." Silence. Pure, enormous silence across the pass. Then, from the council force, something began to happen that nobody expected. They started to kneel. Not all of them. Not quickly. But the front row, then the second, then the third, wolves who had been conditioned their entire lives to bow to the High Council banner, feeling something in their oldest instincts that the conditioning had never quite reached. Responding to the mark the way animals respond to weather that is about to change everything. Aldrich watched his own army genuflect, and his face went through 6 expressions in 4 seconds. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Celine agreed. "It's beginning." He turned his horse and rode back through his army, and the ones who had knelt watched him go, and in that watching was the death of 30 years of unquestioned loyalty. The battle that followed was not the cataclysm anyone expected. It was a collapse. The few commanders who remained committed to the council attacked fiercely and were met by a rogue force that fought with the particular ferocity of people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Kale was everywhere, front line, flanks, back to center, coordinating through Mara's running communications with a calm that looked in the heat of battle less like performance and more like a man in his natural element, which was the most attractive and the most terrifying thing Celine had ever seen. She held the ridge. And every time a pocket of fighting below began to go wrong, she raised her hand and the moonlight responded, not as a weapon, not killing, but as presence, flooding the field with silver clarity and the ancient authority of something that predated every war ever fought on this ground. Wolves on both sides felt it. And made choices. Most chose well. It was over in 2 hours. Aldrich and 7 of his senior commanders surrendered formally at midnight, kneeling in the pass with the moon overhead and the silver-lit crescent visible from every angle of the field. Celine descended from the ridge. Kale met her at the bottom. He was not unmarked. There was a fresh cut on his forearm, sealed already by wolf healing, and a bruise forming along his jaw that she noticed before she noticed anything else and had to deliberately not reach for. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Better now," he said quietly, looking at her. She looked back at him. The battlefield behind him was full of movement and voices and the pragmatic business of aftermath. In front of her was this man who had walked into her dungeon and changed every variable in her life without asking, and had then spent every day since giving her the choice he said she deserved, and had never once taken back the offer or made it conditional or used it as leverage. She took his face in both her hands. Carefully. Like he was something that could be startled, which he couldn't, but she wanted to be careful anyway. She felt him still completely under her hands. Every molecule of that enormous, contained, coiled presence going quiet. "I'm choosing," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm choosing you," she said. His hands came up and covered hers, gently, so gently for hands that had just come from a battlefield, and he said her name, just her name, nothing else, and it was the most complete sentence she had ever heard. She kissed him. It was not tentative. She had been tentative for 22 years. She was done with tentative. She kissed him the way the mark blazed, with all of it, with the full weight of everything she was and everything she had been denied the right to be. And he kissed her back like she was worth every war. Around them, the field went quiet. Not because anyone signaled it, but because some moments command their own silence. The coronation was not held in the High Council's temple. It was held in the open, under the full moon, in the wide plain outside the rogue camp, with 300 wolves from every corner of the territory assembled in a ring. The rogues and the highborn standing side by side, not because old grudges had been erased overnight, they hadn't, but because the world had shifted underneath everyone's feet, and standing beside each other was the most honest response to new ground. Selene wore white and silver. Her hair was down. The mark was uncovered. Kale stood beside her, not behind her. Not in front. Beside. Mara performed the rite with her voice steady and her eyes wet and her back straight as iron, because she was Mara, and she did not crumble, but she also did not pretend this wasn't enormous. When the rite was complete, when the ancient words had been spoken and the mark had blazed so bright that people half a mile away turned toward it with their hands raised to shield their eyes, Selene turned and faced the assembled packs. They were silent. She looked at them. All of them. The rogues who had followed Kale before she existed. The former council wolves who had knelt in the pass. The cast-offs and the castaways and the quietly loyal and the recently converted. I was in chains for 3 years, she said. Her voice was clear and even. Before that, I spent 16 years in hiding. And before that, I spent 6 years not yet knowing that I would have to hide. She paused. I'm telling you this not because I want your pity. I don't. I'm telling you because the world that put me in chains was the same world that put every one of you somewhere smaller than you were supposed to be. She let that breathe. That world is over. Not because I have power. Because we're choosing to be done with it. Together. She looked across all of them and felt the mark respond to the collective weight of their attention, warm, resonant, ancient. This isn't my empire. It's ours. Kale, standing beside her, turned his head and looked at her with an expression that had moved entirely past every controlled guard he owned, and was simply a man who loved a woman and wasn't hiding it from anyone. She looked back at him. Later, after the ceremony and the hours of assembly and the long practical work of beginning to build what needed to be built, they stood alone on the wall of the rogue camp, looking out at the moon. The mark rested quietly against her skin. Warm. Present. Permanent. She leaned her shoulder against his. He put his arm around her. Simple as that. What do we do now? She said. We build something worth ruling, he said. And if it goes wrong? Then we fix it, he said. And keep fixing it. That's all ruling ever is, if you're doing it honestly. She looked at the sky. The crescent moon above them glowed silver against the dark. Below it, in the plain, 300 wolves had become one people. And in the rogue camp that had once been a last resort and was now the first stone of something new, a fire burned in every window, and the sound of a world remaking itself floated up on the warm air. On the wall above the main gate, someone had carved the mark into the stone. The silver crescent. Not a secret anymore. Not a warning. A promise. This is the end and the beginning. If this story found something in you, don't let it disappear quietly. Hit that like button and let me know it mattered. Leave a comment, tell me your favorite moment, your favorite line, the second this story grabbed you by the collar and wouldn't let go. Was it the dungeon? The battlefield? The kiss? Tell me. Share this with someone who needs a story that reminds them what it looks like when the thing the world tried to hide becomes the thing the world kneels for. And if you haven't subscribed, do it now. Because Selene's story is just the first door. There are more. See you on the other side.